To continue our discussion on the philosophical perspective in understanding the self, we will continue and hopefully we can discuss the remaining philosophers that are part of the coverage of this lesson on philosophical perspective on understanding the self. But before we continue, let's do some recap on what we have discussed and learned from the thoughts of Socrates as far as understanding the self is concerned. So going back to Socrates, this is a very short recap. He coined this notion, knowing oneself. And that is for him, that is the very goal of life is to be able to obtain happiness. And such goal motivates us to act towards or to avoid things that could have negative repercussions in our lives. So for Socrates, it is very important to evaluate the different identifications that we have associated ourselves with. As I've mentioned also in the last recording, we have associated ourselves with different identifications. We have associated ourselves with our baptismal name, with the place we live in, our gender. More so, we also associated ourselves with the feelings that we felt for that moment. And so it's very important to identify which among these identifications are considered temporary or inherent to our existence. So by doing so, we will be able, therefore, to know the things that we have, the things that we are, especially on this portion here, to understand our strengths and weaknesses, the things that we like and dislike, how we want people to treat us, and how we want ourselves to be treated. So at the end, Socrates value the so-called meditation, value the so-called introspective activities wherein we give ourselves time to reflect, talk to ourselves, in the sense that we grow and we determine the best version of ourselves. And that is Socrates' philosophical perspective on understanding the self. Now let's proceed to what Plato had for us as far as, again, the philosophical perspective of understanding of the self is concerned. So one important razor or saying which is opined by Plato is this one: good actions give strength to ourselves and inspire good actions in other people. This is very important for Plato in the sense that our definition of ourselves could actually be manifested via our action. And for Plato, this is to be able to become a philosopher king, to be able to acquire the necessary virtues as well as proper intelligence, so that the only thing that we would like to identify ourselves with is always attached with what is true. So generally speaking, Plato believed in the division of a person's body and soul, which forms a person, so that you are not because, not simply because of your body, not because simply, not simply because uh, you are just born as a human being, but because you have the so-called soul. Plato presented the idea the one soul is divided into three different parts that has different views that would lead to different behaviors. So that uh, when we find ourselves doing something, find ourselves behaving in a particular manner, there is actually the soul that governed the action. Thus, Plato defined three different souls which a person has. First is called the appetitive soul. The appetitive soul is the element that enjoys sensual experiences such as food, drink, and sexual pleasure. So for Plato, this part of the human person drive to satisfy the desire of the flesh, the pleasure of the flesh. No? As long as the person find an object or situation good or satisfying, the appetitive soul can drive the person to lean towards those objects and situations. So that when our behavior is purely geared towards the satisfaction of the flesh, we may be, according to Plato, we are driven by the appetitive soul. But Plato would like to emphasize higher level of soul rather than appetitive. So let's proceed to the spirited soul. This element is inclined towards reason, but understand the demand of passion, the part that loves honor and victory. It is this attribute that uh, compel the person to want something in a manner of choosing what is right from wrong. Spirited soul could be competitive and is very active. It is compelling a person to act according to laws that you would like to be recognized with. Like for example, if you want to, if getting a high honor is part of what is being desired as far as the society is concerned, it is the spirited soul that compelled the person to compete oneself to be able to gain that positive expectation, so that the result is pleasurable but at a higher level. Okay, so while ago, the appetitive soul is pleasurable as far as the flesh is concerned, what the body wants. No? More likely, these are governed by the senses, no? The sense of smell, taste, sexual pleasure. These are all appetitive elements, while spirited are something that are higher of nature, no? Something that the mind wants to achieve, no? High honors, being a person with good character, and so on and so forth. While the third, which would actually govern both the spirited and the appetitive soul, is the so-called rational soul. And this is the part where human beings are governed by the so-called reasoning. This element forbid the person to enjoy the sensual experience, the part that loves truth, hence should rule over the other part of the soul through the use of reason. That is, when the rational soul would like to govern the sensual soul, which is the appetitive soul. Sensual because you are driven by your senses. So it's the rational soul that will try to direct the sense whether the pleasure is really helpful. It's helping a person to realize oneself, as it is ought to be. On the other hand, the rational soul could also govern the spirited soul, because competition, if not taken well, may increase the chance of stress in the body, so that the rational soul will also tame down the feelings, spirit to compete, and would only compete on things that are reasonable. Like, for example, a typical student who put oneself in harder position, dili matulog, magtuon ra permente, sige og diligent kayo, so much that one's health is neglected. So it's the rational soul that would compel the student to rest and to tell to the self, bugumsa man ang imuhang kaugmaon kung dili ka maugmaan. Okay? So in this manner, Plato therefore encourage us to identify which govern our action as a human being. The self is an acting being. The self behaves. The self acts. The self moves. Ikaw mulihok. Ikaw mubuhat. Pangutana na, diha si mong pagbuhat, you are being accorded, you are being guided by an element of the soul that you have, whether it's appetitive, spirited, or rational. And so Plato would try to emphasize to us that we should be governed by our rational soul, because that would make us different from other beings. You see, as far as appetitive is concerned, animals are also appetitive. Animals are also governed by their sensual. Animals are also being governed by their feelings. So if we will insist on being governed by these souls, by our appetite and by our feelings, then what would make us better than animals? The answer is, it's our rationality. It's when we try to tame, we try to reason out with the wants of our appetite, the feelings that we feel on that moment will direct us to become better persons. So that's a very important and very sound philosophical perspective of the self as far as Plato is concerned. Now let's move to third philosopher, Saint Augustine. Saint Augustine is a believer of Plato. He's father, one of the fathers of the church, as far as the Catholic Church is concerned. Although a saint and a leader of the Catholic Church as a bishop, more than those identities, Augustine is also a philosopher who could share something for us as far as understanding of the self is concerned. So, sa may suggest ni St. Augustine as far as understanding the self is concerned. St. Augustine was deeply influenced by Plato's idea on forms. Meaning to say, he's also an idealistic person because Plato was an idealist. No? Thus, Augustine believed that the true self must be modeled in the likeness and image of the divine. So here, St. Augustine also relates our existence to God being modeled in his likeness. Though being alive means that we are still far from God and has yet to be truly with him. So for St. Augustine, it is very important for us to inspire, to have that aspiration to be like God, in a sense that God is the source of everything that are beautiful and good. No? So for St. Augustine, that is trying to identify ourselves with the Creator. It's very important for us to have that appreciation, especially that we are believers of a divine being. But the question there is, why is that there are people who are evading good and doing evil? As we go along and answer that question, it is found out Augustine has this belief that our notion of ourselves and our idea of existence come from a higher form of sense, in which bodily senses may not perceive or understand. The more one doubts and questions his life means that the person is actually living. So, answering that question, anong na may tao nga magbuhat yapon kung dili maayo, is actually the journey of understanding who we are may not that be clear as what we think of it. There are doubts. There are a lot of experiences that may compel us, that may hinder us from acknowledging ourselves, no, as identified to that of God. Because as far as Christian perspective is concerned, there is this existence of evil. So there is this dominions, the enemy of God that would try to influence us and to go against God. So that men, as far as we are still alive, human beings, as far as we are still alive, is in a constant battle between identifying ourselves with our Creator or leaving behind that identity and try to choose evil in a manner that evil has disguised in the image of pleasure and happiness, quote unquote. It's not genuine happiness, but a fake happiness. Now, since Augustine is a believer, is being influenced by Plato, he considered the appetitive soul, the appetitive part of us, is the is the reason of that hindrance, no? So that for Saint Augustine, our journey, our goal of identifying ourselves to God is being aware of who you truly are, to recognize that you are a whole person, and lastly, that you can be united. You need to be aware that you can be united with God. You can be identifying, if you have the ability to identify yourself with God. So, let's just continue. St. Augustine, while integrating the teaching of the church in his philosophy and establishing our sense of self with God, which we cannot achieve with our bodies, since the limitation of our senses, Torah, limitation of our senses in truly understanding the essence of our existence and the rule of world is limited. So people is in need to establish the relationship with God through being virtuous. It has to be a capital G because we're referring to the divine. While at the same time, although we have that constant ability to be identified with God, to be able to stand by on what we think is true, who we think we are, that are from our own understanding and solely defined by us alone, although people may say differently, by continuously questioning and finding the truth, we'll be able to find the best answer to who we are and what our role is in the world. So for St. Augustine, it's very important for us to have that constant reminder that we can be identified back to our Creator, to the one that created us, that is God. Lastly, St. Augustine pointed out that a person is similar to God as regards to the mind and its ability. That by ignoring to use our mind, we also become irresponsible. If we will try to ignore that, no, we lose the possibility to reach that goal of being identified to God, because what that identification to God provides us at the end is real, meaningful, and lasting happiness. The third and final philosopher that we will be discussing for this recording is René Descartes. We will have another separate recording for the last set of philosophers for this philosophical perspective on understanding the self. So as far as René Descartes is concerned, what we can learn from him is that he believed on this razor or saying, I think, therefore I am. This particular statement, I think, therefore I am, which is a statement coming from the Latin term cogito ergo sum. Cogito means I think, ergo means therefore, and sum is I am. Is a reflection from René Descartes stating that we are, or you are, because of your capability of rational decision making. Because you are capable of thinking, then you exist as a human being. This understanding of a human person can actually be traced, no, to the different works of the philosophers we have discussed before. But this is just like, for example, Socrates, who opined, who believed that your ability to reflect is the most important thing, no, that made you a human being, that made you who you are. Well, Plato believed that by by following your rational soul, that will make you human being, and try to tame those other elements of the soul, such as appetitive and spirited. More so, St. Augustine would try to uh, purport that it is very important for us to identify ourselves to our Creator. And this all are being encapsulated by René Descartes' I think, therefore I am. Your capability to think will help you to realize what these other philosophers had to say about yourself. Your capability to think made you realize, made you give you the opportunity to think of who you are, as far as Socrates is concerned. Your capability to think will allow you to choose rationality over appetitive and spirited souls. And your capability to think is the most essential ingredient that will make you identify yourself to your Creator. So therefore, René Descartes is helping us to retrieve of the very essence of who we are, because sometimes we have this tendency, you know, to be succumb kanang maunhan ta sa ato ang appetite, maunhan ta sa wants and feelings, no, rather what is being needed, essentially needed. Okay, these are three different things that actually compelled us, no, to act kanang mubuhat ta og usa ka butang, whether there's something at the level of want, there's something at the level of feelings, or the level of essential needs, no. This, I think, therefore I am, this understanding that we are because of our capability to think, is coupled with this philosophical philosophical method of René Descartes called methodical doubt. Doubt, sa Binisaya pa, magduda. When we say we have to doubt, it means we do not immediately believe on something without having thoroughly thought about it. Because sometimes, sometimes what we need, what we want, and what we feel may be temporary only. That is why, as a practice to this, no, whenever we decide on essential matters, no, when it would affect maybe our career, our relationship, we need to think twice, no, before we act, rather than immediately follow what we want, no. Ganit na mga steps, no, like for example, kung mupalita, no, ato sana siyang paugmaan, kay kung inigugma kinahanglan pa nato na, then that is at the level of need. But if kung karon dayon nimo na siya i-click, no, i-add to cart o imo din na siyang i-COD, no, cash on delivery, especially kanang mga Shopee, Lazada, immediately kay nakakita ka, that is at the level of wants or feeling. So paugmaan pa na nimo. Kay kung inikugma imo pa na siya gihapon nga need, kinahanglan pagyapon animo, then probably and possibly that is at the level now of need, no? Essential needs. So at the end, Rene Descartes, no, explained that because we cannot always trust our senses and in turn what we perceive as who we are or the essence of our existence, we should focus, no, on our capability as a rational being. That is the force of the mind, no? The power of the mind. No? The more we think and doubt, the more we can, the more we think and doubt, no, the more we can achieve the correctness of thinking, the correctness of decision. No? Lastly, Rene Descartes implied that being in a constant doubt regarding our existence is the proof that a person actually exists. This is a bit philosophical, but ang point ani is that kampante ka nga nagunahuna ka because you are doubting, no? Because you are trying to think. Because when we doubt, when we question things, we are thinking, no? Kay we formulate questions, we try to see the situations, and then we look at for proper answer. So to end this discussion, Rene Descartes, therefore, is the father of modern philosophy. The modernity here referred to the use of intelligence that is not that is separate from superstitious belief. Modernity, modern philosophy refers to the era by which we only accept facts and things that can have evidences, no, as far as their existence and their proof of validity is concerned. In contrast to the tendency to just believe immediately, no? That is at the level of superstitious belief.